So we had the meditation, of course, on the self, more on the absence of a permanent self. Sometimes people say, well, maybe there is a permanent self, maybe there is something. But actually, from a Buddhist point of view, the self we're attached to, the self that governs our life, or the sense of a self, that is the one, that figment of our imagination. It's like something our mind creates. Whether there's something else or what, sometimes people have that idea and we don't have the time to really go into it, but I'm not saying there is and there isn't. Often the answer is like, well, it doesn't matter, because what we're attached to is that self that we perceive to be permanent. Okay? So, at least with regard to like the kosa level here, so just when we attach the kosa level, that thing when I think I, that I seems to exist permanently. Okay? And that would make sense, because that would mean it exists independent of mind and body. So it would no longer make sense to say, I'm cold when my body is cold, I'm meditating when my mind is meditating. It wouldn't make sense because it's separate. Okay? So that would not grow old, it'll just be unchanging. Okay? And that's from a Buddhist point of view, that's the I that we perceive, and if that was permanent, it wouldn't make sense. Now, the Dalai Lama talks a little bit about permanence, more towards the end. I forget the exact page number. He talks about permanence. Yeah, I forget the number, page number, but it's at the end. Oh yeah, impermanence, yeah. And he mentions a few things that I thought, they're really helpful. And since it's in the book, not difficult to understand, but since they're in the book, I might as well talk about it, that we have a sense of permanence. It's this idea that things are really concrete, and that they're this and not that. Okay, so very concrete, this or not that, as in like in and of themselves, has nothing to do with me labeling it this or that. Like, of course, like we say, conventionally there's good or bad, conventionally there's long or short. Some things, it's not all in the same way, let's put it that way. It would be hard to say that murdering someone is good and bad both, actually. Because in relation to what we all want is to be alive, and even if we wanted to die, life is very precious. Life is very precious. Being a human being is considered to be really precious, and so to respect and to honor life, therefore to kill, okay, unless there is a better reason than just to kill, there can be exceptions where you may even have to kill someone. I mean, the question, if we had known what Hitler was going to do, actually, and people tried to assassinate him besides the fact that it didn't work out, but if people had known in advance what he was going to do, you would actually have done Hitler a favor. Out of compassion for Hitler. Before he went out on, I know it's hard to say, but before he started doing these terrible things, because he harmed himself so much more than anyone else, from the point of view of everything coming back, from the point of view of karma. Every suffering Hitler has given out, he'll experience that multiplied. Okay? Let's take the Buddhist view. You don't have to believe it, but the Buddhist view would be that it totally comes back. Every single suffering comes back to Hitler. So, therefore, just out of compassion for Hitler, an assassin would have done him a favor. And the Dalai Lama says sometimes, a long life is very important. But when you live a terrible, cruel, harmful life, then you're better off if you have a short life. Because you're just harming yourself, basically, in that way. So, but what I'm trying to say, in general, life is precious, we should honor life and not kill someone. So to say it's good from that perspective to kill, it's bad from that, in general, it's good not to kill, not to take someone's life. Okay, so that's just from that perspective, from the perspective that life is precious. But then there are other things, you know, they're good from that perspective, bad from that perspective. Okay, and this is short and long from two perspectives, it's both. And it's harder to see how, from this perspective, this is a table, from a different perspective, it's the opposite. Well, yeah, you could say, from one perspective it's a table, and from another perspective it's a non-table because it's a chair. And a chair is not a table. So it can even go as far as that. But the point is here that it's always relative to something other than itself. We then call it this, that, and the other. Okay? All right. Now, having said that, now going back to the self, so we call it the I. From this perspective, this is I. From your perspective, it's other. But that I is constantly changing. It's changing. Things are changing. There are permanent phenomena that are not changing, but the I is not one of them. Most things that we perceive, they're constantly changing. But because of our misperception of reality, because we make things more concrete than they are, we make things permanent. We turn them, because to us they exist independently. They exist truly as this, that, and the other. If they existed that way, they wouldn't change, because something that exists independently cannot change, because change depends on other factors changing it. But if it doesn't depend on anything, how could it change? It would always remain the same. So our mind actually is kind of consistent, if you like, in terms of perceiving things as inherently existent. Therefore, we also perceive it as non-changing. Sometimes we think, yeah, it's inherently existent and it changes. That's contradictory. But sometimes it feels like this, the I is all the same, always the same. We did this meditation in the morning or before lunch. Okay, now why is impermanence so important? Impermanence means usually not what we think it means. Impermanence does not mean eternal, non-eternal. Impermanent does not mean non-eternal. Impermanent doesn't mean something is not always there. Permanent doesn't mean it's eternal. Okay? Impermanent means, although something is always there, mind will always be there. But each moment of mind is slightly different from the moment before, and a former moment becomes the next moment, becomes the next moment, becomes the next moment. So mind doesn't go out of existence, but within each moment it is slightly different. It changes. The object change. So mind, we call, what is mind? Mind is the label, the whole, that is given based on an activity that is an activity which is perceiving an object. So you need an object and an action. There's an action which is experiencing, apprehending, with an object that appears to it. Based on that, we say mind. There's also no inherent mind. So that is called the mind. Now, the mind changes moment by moment, because moment by moment, the mind does something different. One moment it merely apprehends, the next moment it judges, the next moment it categorizes, it thinks about something, it gets angry, it loves, gets attached, right? Just the mental consciousness, just the mind that's ever present. From moment to moment, it does something different. It thinks about this, it thinks about that, it thinks about tomorrow, yesterday, right? Constantly the objects are changing, the activity slightly changes. It always apprehends something, but apprehending or being aware can do more than that. Just being aware, it doesn't work with this object. So, therefore, the mind is always changing. It's impermanent, but it's always there. There will always be mind. So it's eternal. Mind does not stop. Has no beginning, no end. But within each moment, it's slightly different. That's what it means to be impermanent. And you can also have things that are permanent and not always around. Okay? not always around. So, never mind, I'm not going to go into that because you're going to ask questions and I don't want to go. So, you can ask Nissim, for instance, Niv, some older students, Itzik, and many of you that I just don't know well enough to know whether you're older students. What's your name? You can ask her anyway, by the way. So, yes. So, I know some of you have been around long enough to understand permanence. It's, never mind. But impermanent, that's important. So, we somehow believe things to be permanent, and that's why we think we're not going to die. That's why we think we're not going to die. But we misunderstand death anyway. We think death is just an end. Just an end. Actually, from one perspective, it's an end. From another perspective, it's a beginning. In fact, every moment is a death and a beginning. Every night you go to sleep, it's the death of today. Of the death of you today. And it's the beginning of you, during the night and then the next day. In fact, every moment, things change moment by moment. So every moment is the end of one thing, but the beginning of something new. So from one perspective, from the perspective of what's before, it's the end. From the perspective of what's to come, it's the beginning. So death is actually both the end of this life and the beginning of a new life. Okay? Just as going to sleep is the end of this day and the beginning of a next day. Even birth. Birth is the beginning of this life for one person, but the end of what was previous. Now, that's a little hard when past and future lives are not really okay. So that is difficult. If you have some idea, mine could go on, all right, that would make sense. But at least you could allow the possibility, because we don't know either way. Both is possible. So maybe life goes on. But the point is that for us, we're scared of death because it's just an end. We believe that's the end of everything. All right. But even though that were the case, to not face death, it's not a good idea. Because the one thing you will have, definitely, the one thing in life that is certain is death. It's not certain that you go shopping tomorrow. Certain that you die one day. That I can guarantee. Can't guarantee anything else. I can guarantee that all of us will at some point die. Okay? That's just the nature of life. I mean, I don't know whether they come up with, people say they can come up with a drug to live a long time. From a Buddhist point of view, that's impossible. Okay? Let's see. But so far, as things are right now, we're going to die. It's certain we're going to die one day. So some people are so scared of death. Okay, I get that. I totally get that. But what is better? To just allow that fear to be there and never face it, and then one day death is there and you're like, kicking and screaming? Or to face your fear right now, become used to it, and when death comes, it's like, all right, I've been expecting you, okay, and go peacefully. So in Buddhism, it is seen as so important to face our own death, to think about our own death. So we are prepared. We are prepared in the sense that the Dalai Lama talks about this. Let's say we are all in prison and we're going to be executed really soon. How are we going to treat each other? Are we going to be jealous of each other and, like bicker with each other? No, we're in the same boat, we're all going to be executed. So there's much more of a sense, what's important, what's really important. So actually, in a sense, we're all moving closer to our own death. What are the things that are really important? If I knew I was going to die tomorrow, would I do all the things I do today? Right? Actually, I probably wouldn't do I would do a lot more meaningful things. Okay? And I don't know whether I'm going to be alive tomorrow. So in Buddhism, you try to live your life always with the possibility this is your last day. So that when, in case it is your last day, which is totally possible, you have no regrets. You die peacefully. So it's an important idea. I know it sounds a little dark and scary, but come on, it's only dark and scary as long as you regard it as such. I mean, Buddhist monks and nuns, when they're practicing, they're preparing, and it's fine. They're not scared of death. And so they're much braver and much more, they're really brave, and there are less things that scare them. But of course they don't take risks as such. They still see life as precious, but there's just not that worry and little things that are not that important, they're just not that important. But there's more to that, because even without thinking of death, the Buddha has said something, like it says, whatever comes together will have to disperse. So every gathering ends with dispersal. Every meeting ends with separation. Everything that goes up has to come down. So a lot of the things we want to last, they're just not going to last. So to let go already now makes our life easier, right? We're going to be together with lovely people and friends, but we have to separate, right? Whether it's today after this class or with your family at some point, it'll not always be the same. We'll meet people, we'll gather, we'll disperse. We'll gather, we disperse. From a Buddhist point of view, actually, the people you have to separate from in this life, you meet again. So that's why we say love, jokingly, there's no love on first sight. You were probably married with that person before. And we see them and you're like, I know that guy. It feels like we know. Yeah, right, of course it feels like you know, because you know. You were married for a few lifetimes, right? So there is this, like a lot of people we meet, like, we meet someone and we go, I don't like that person. Well, probably you had some history. Or we feel scared of them or whatever. I mean, yeah, it's past, it's just something left on the mind. And we meet people again, we come together, we separate. It's just on a larger scale. We'll have different relations with one another. Sometimes we're married, then someone is the mother of another, then the father, then it's the child. Constant, and even within one life, our relationships change all the time. So even over more lifetimes, they change all the time. So that's a really powerful meditation, to have a sense, well, this person I'm close to this life, but this bus driver was my partner, or my mother, or my father, right? Okay. Anyway, without going into that, the point is, everything will have an end. To become aware of that. Become aware of that. To not hold on to something, that's like holding on to quicksand. If you hold on to a relationship or something and want it to remain the same, it's just not being realistic. Just not realistic. So the thing is, when I first encountered Tibetans, I thought they were very unemotional. Well, that's a kind way of saying it. They were like rocks. I had that sense they were so weird. No emotions, right? So from my perspective, they were like cold. Because when something terrible happened, they were like, oh. When something great happened, they were like, oh. And I was like, there's a German saying like, Himmel hoch jauchzend zu, what is it? Himmel hoch jauchzend? Something betrübt. Like, up in the sky, totally exuberant, down on the earth, totally crushed. That was me. Emotional yo-yo. Why? Because I guess my emotional response, and I only learned that later, my teacher called me an emotional yo-yo, and I called the Tibetans cold. Because in comparison to me, they were like, right, like I showed you. And I learned that my response was because when something wonderful happened, I was like, wow! And like having a sense it's going to last, so getting really excited about it. But when something terrible happened, oh, disaster, as if it was going to last. So it really tore me down. The Tibetans, their culture is very much influenced by Buddhism. So without knowing the philosophy much in detail, but they know something great happens as the moment of that, it is already it's already changing to be something else, right? So enjoy the split moment, but don't get like as if it's going to last. Just enjoy it for the moment and let it go. Something horrible, okay, something horrible, let it go. It's already changing. The moment there's something great, it's going out of existence because things are just momentary, right? So we know from our own reaction, we meet someone and the first moment is like, yeah, we're really hungry, we do some hummus, wow, first spoon, amazing. Second may be amazing, but by spoon number 10, it's like, right? Or we meet someone, we haven't seen them, first hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4, 5 days, 6 days, 7 days, when are they leaving, right? So the thing is, like, whatever there is, unless we change the object, right? I mean, okay, I meet them, I do something else, but if I stay with the same object, sooner or later, this moment of elation goes away. Yes?
What is the attitude of the Tibetan to the Chinese occupation, which is a little more than a moment?
Yes, it's more than a moment, but again, they got used to it now. It's not like they suffer as in like the same way as then they're lost. And they're still working towards it. They're working towards gaining back freedom for Tibet. But they basically see also some of the advantages. It's not everything bad about the occupation of China, of Tibet, because it actually shook up Tibetan culture that was pretty much stuck in sometimes useless rituals. And they had to question again what is really important, the stuff we're holding on to. There was a lot of bickering among many of the officials. So the Dalai Lama sometimes said, well, Buddhism wouldn't have come to the West if it wasn't for Tibet losing its freedom, because Tibetans, it was the forbidden land, so no one was allowed to go there, because they wanted to keep their cultures in an artificial way, which was a mistake. The 13th Dalai Lama talked about opening up Tibet, but the officials didn't want to. So there was a lot of stuff happening, and it shook up the Tibetans. So there was a lot of suffering on one hand, but it's in and of itself is neither positive nor negative. It depends how you use it. So the point, what I'm trying to do, but of course there's great benefit from Tibetan culture, and some of their philosophies are really, really, like the Buddhist philosophies, can give a lot to other people, so to preserve it as soon as possible. And the Chinese government, the problem is not that the Chinese government took over Tibet. That's not the problem. The problem is they don't want Tibetans to remain Tibetans. They don't want their culture and their religion to remain. They want to turn them into Chinese. That's why the Dalai Lama is saying, we don't need independence. Autonomy is fine, but autonomy, politically, if we're not independent, who cares? We can be under the Chinese and follow Chinese laws, but we need to be able to preserve our culture, our religion. That's important, okay? So, therefore, everything is going to end, nothing is going to remain the same. So to get so super excited, the Tibetans are like, okay, there's a problem, but now it's already changing. What can I do to change this problem? And so they have this saying they use all the time. It's actually from Shantideva, and they really live accordingly. It says, Shantideva says, if there's a problem and you can remedy the problem, why would you worry? If you cannot remedy the problem, what's the use to worry? And they live accordingly. Okay? Things go wrong. Okay, all right. Didn't go according to my wishes, so that's why I call it wrong. But see whether I can adjust my attitude and find a problem to the solution. If I find a problem to the solution to the problem. If I find a solution to the problem, yeah. If I find a solution to the problem, well then, why do I need to worry? I can get rid of the problem. But if I can't right now, I don't find a solution, well, what's the use that I worry? And they really live it. I promise they live it. They totally understand that, and they live accordingly. So they're really laid back, and they don't get upset easily. And like I said, they understand that nothing is going to last. Okay, there's this really... So just that understanding of impermanence can make a huge difference to your life. Huge difference. The fact that we're aging. Come on, we're all aging. Let's face it, what's so bad about aging? Everyone, we have a sense, when I was 20, I felt like I was always going to be 20. Right? And I remember I was in the kibbutz, I was like 18, 19, and there was this really old girl. She felt so old. She was 24. I remember thinking, oh, if I ever get that old. Oh. I remember thinking, how bizarre is that? My sense of like what's old and what's young. I'm looking at my nieces and nephews, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I must be so old to them because I'm long past 24. So, therefore, the point is that we have this sense of like it's always the same, and we want to remain young, and being young is good, but that's just so. We're just old, we age, we all age, right? Moment by moment we're aging. It's not like once a week we age. This is one day a week. I mean, we get wrinkles, right? So if you look after 10 years, your face has more wrinkles. It becomes more obvious. That's coarse impermanence. But that's only because we change all the time. It's not like once every Wednesday. It's like a change, you know, and then next Wednesday there's another change. No, our body is all the time aging, right? In Tibetan they say, you're racing toward, the moment you're born, you're racing towards your own death. Right? Moment by moment, 1 second less, etc. So be in touch with that. Don't hold on to things. It's like holding on to quicksand. You know, like sand, you're trying to hold on to it and keep something solid. That's what we're doing with our relationships. They're not going to remain the same. Okay? Now we're good friends. Who knows what's going to be tomorrow? Enjoy it for as long as it lasts and let it go. Don't hold on and expectations. I want it to last. I want it to remain the same. Even with the eye, how can there be a solid eye if everything's constantly changing? My mind is constantly changing, the body is constantly changing, so there could not be such solid eye. But our resentment towards others, like holding a grudge, the example, right? I still don't talk to that person because that's the guy who harmed me yesterday. That idea. Not talking to, because this is the one who hurt me. Okay? That's the feeling. That's no longer the one that hurts you. It's a continuum. It's not like a totally new person, as in like it's my neighbor now, or like, no, we're not saying that. That's another extreme. No, but it's the continuum of that person. So it's this person's not exactly the same. So you still have to possibly be punished for what you've done wrong, but that doesn't require resentment. Our resentment exaggerates, our resentment solidifies, makes that which is impermanent permanent. Okay, to that mind, that's how it appears. So, having said that much about impermanence, so therefore the I is definitely impermanent. So there cannot be a permanent, kind of separate entity that's called the I. The way it appears to us, that I cannot exist that way. Then, the second layer is, okay, once you've understood that, let's say we had a meditational experience, we understood the I is actually changing. We get a sense of that fluidity. The self is like this fluid entity, it's just changing all the time. So we are able to understand that. We now understand the rock that appeared as a rock is not a rock after all. It's a living being. Okay, we've gone a step further. Now we look at the self, and what we now end up, because we haven't looked close enough, what we see now is what is called, so previously it was called a permanent, partless, independent self. Why partless? Because if it's independent, it's not dependent on its parts. Okay? But if mind and body are changing, if they're changing, then they cannot be the part of the I, because only something impermanent can have parts. Something permanent, why would it have parts? And anyway, it exists independent of them because the changes of mind and body do not affect it since it's permanent. Which is why it's partless. It's permanent, partless, independent. Okay? So that's self-impossible. Like a pea in a jar. Right? As if like the body and the mind were like the jar and the self was like a pea. Like a separate kind of entity. Or chickpea or whatever. That doesn't work. Now then, if the next level would be to watch the I, so maybe we get rid of the sense, we've seen there is no such permanent I, so the mind that perceives it can actually be lessened or eventually totally removed. Okay? The example that would be like if you believe there's, I don't know, there's a snake in your cupboard, how do you find out there's no snake in the cupboard? You look for the snake. If the cupboard is empty, then the mind that perceives the snake in the cupboard will not arise.